130 years have passed since the terrible and mysterious murders in Whitechapel, and the only thing they have in common is the name Jack the Ripper. The main secret and mystery is that the real name of the serial killer no one has ever learned. Until recently, Geneticists CSI published an article stating that they had uncovered the identity of the Ripper. A DNA test on the shawl of one of the victims helped, but who had been on the suspect list all along? Investigators were looking at several suspects. Barber Aaron Kosminski was a Jewish man of Polish descent who, by a strange coincidence, was not only a mentally ill man, but also a pathological hater of women. There was plenty of circumstantial evidence against Kosminski and no alibi. However, a witness to one of the crimes did not identify the hairdresser. Nevertheless, after being accused of attempting to murder his sister, doctors declared the barber mentally ill and sent him for involuntary treatment to Brighton Hospital, where he died in 1919. Dr. Francis Tambolti is another suspect. After his death, a lot of expensive jewelry was found in his belongings and only 2 simple rings, which surprisingly did not fit in any way into his collection. Why? Perhaps because they didn't belong to him, but to one of the Ripper's victims, who had had 2 similar pieces of jewelry removed from her fingers. Francis never invited women into his house, and when his friends asked him why, he said he would rather poison himself than let that vile sex into his house. After these words, he took his guests to one of the rooms in which he kept a collection of preserved female wombs in glass jars. The collection is not yet complete, he told guests. Francis came to Whitechapel in June 1888, and preferred the company of underage boys. Eventually he was arrested, but after 3 days of unsuccessful interrogation, the police were forced to release him on bail, after which he immediately fled London. Tambolti sailed to the United States. In 1889 the murders of prostitutes repeated themselves, but this time in New York. But for some reason the British police, despite the undeniable facts, did not connect the events. Francis Tambolti never became the main suspect, although it is believed that it was most likely he who wrote the letter to the police boasting about the victim's kidney being eaten. The handwriting was confirmed by forensics. The most scandalous assumption about the identity of the murderer has been made about Prince Albert Victor. There is evidence and information from contemporaries that Albert Victor was a frequent visitor to a brothel for homosexuals. It is also known that at times the prince did not disdain the street prostitutes of Whitechapel. And here historians refer to the theory of royal conspiracy. One of the prostitutes with whom the prince once spent time became pregnant by him, which put the entire royal line at risk. And she also told her 4 other friends, who made a living doing what she did, about it. This was unacceptable to the crown. These women had to be removed at all costs. But there was insufficient evidence to bring charges against any of the suspects. The mystery of Jack the Ripper continued to be solved by many enthusiasts until the 21st century. One of the enthusiasts was businessman Russell Edwards. In 2007, he bought at auction a shawl that belonged to one of the victims and preserved what was thought to be genetic material from both the victim and the killer. It was this object that was the subject of the research conducted by Jari Louchelainen and David Miller. Louchelainen conducted the first analyses 10 years ago, and the results were mentioned by Edwards in his book, but this statement was not taken seriously. The details of the study have not been published. The current article by the 2 researchers was intended to fill this gap. To the best of our knowledge, this is the most comprehensive study of the case to date, the authors of the paper write in their article. According to their study, the killer was Aaron Kosminski. Traces of DNA from 2 people were found on the shawl. Mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed down through the maternal line and often used in the construction of family trees, was analyzed with sufficient accuracy to draw conclusions about the identity of the carriers, according to the authors. The DNA sequences were compared with those of living relatives of the victim, Catherine Eddowes, and suspect Aaron Kosminski. The authors claim to have found convincing matches. The scientific community met the article by Liverpool geneticists with extreme skepticism. The main criticism is the lack of accurate information in the article about the decrypted DNA sequences, as well as the details of the experimental procedure. The authors argue that they cannot make the results of the decoding public, because they fall under the category of personal data, and their secrecy is protected by law. However, according to Dr. Walter Parson, a forensic geneticist at Innsbruck Medical University cited by Science magazine, this law does not apply to mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is transmitted from generation to generation only through the maternal line, and it is identical, to the accuracy of individual mutations, in all descendants of the same woman, and therefore cannot be used to establish identity. Are these claims fair? The requirements for the quality of scientific evidence depend on the kind of truth the evidence is used to establish. Evidence capable of convincing a jury in a trial may be inadmissible in a scientific molecular biological study, and vice versa. As for the Jack the Ripper story, of course, there is no trial or deep theoretical science involved. 130 years after the murders were committed, and a century after the death of the main suspect, the results obtained by Lochalainen and Miller are of more scientific entertainment and, at best, historical significance. Do you think this research is worth believing, or was the killer someone else? I can only wish you to subscribe to the channel and look forward to more videos. See you soon.